If you own a house or dream of one someday, then jump in the passenger seat and belt yourself because we got two of Colorado's top real estate professionals in the studio, Scott Sufak and Kyle Tzitzicas. The rumors are leaking from the mainstream media, but don't get caught up in the hype. Learn yourself some real estate wisdom and keep calm, cool, and collected, no matter what lawsuits are flying around the ever-changing housing market. Let's juice it up! All right, welcome to the Juice Ortiz Show. I have a couple special guests. We're going to get into some pretty big topics that are going on in our country right now. But without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Kyle Tzitzicas. Kyle, go ahead and give us, did I say that right?
Yeah, that was good.
Really?
Good, yeah.
Do me a favor. Spell your last name for us.
Tzicas.
And where is that from?
It's Greek.
Interesting. Are you Greek?
No.
No? How did you get a Greek last name?
My dad was adopted after World War II, so we inherited it.
I think we're going to have to come back for another interview with Kyle sometime. Word on the street is you used to be a pro snowboarder.
No.
Semi-pro snowboarder.
No, I lived up in Vail and Beaver Creek for quite a while after getting out of high school and all that other stuff. Just kind of became a ski bum, and so did a lot of snowboarding and skiing. It was a great time. But
okay.
Then, you can't live up in the mountain towns as a family, really. So.
And tell us what you do now and how you got from snowboarder to snowboard bum. Sorry, forgive my poor terminology. Snow bum to what you're doing now.
I had a kid on the way and just needed to get into a different line of work. And I was running ski shops and stuff up there. So we decided to move back to Colorado Springs, is where we're originally from, born and raised native here in Colorado Springs. And
awesome.
Decided to move back to Colorado or Colorado Springs and start a different career path that was a little bit more money, but also, something I could do, something that's fun to me. And my mom's been in real estate for years. And so I saw what she did, and I just don't like being confined in an office or anything like that. So it was kind of like, all right, cool. I can go out and meet people and get to know people. At the same token, kind of move around a little bit more and, just do a bunch of different things. So.
And you're a unique type of real estate agent here.
Yeah, nowadays I am. Yeah. Back in the day, I started in the residential side of things and then moved to doing commercial about 7 years ago.
Okay.
And I've been doing commercial real estate quite a bit. I specialize more in industrial and like shopping center kind of stuff. We do a lot of tenant leases with restaurants and stuff like that. And so, it's definitely, there's always something fun going on in our world. We're always doing some sort of fun project and, being part of that. First time business owners, stuff like that. It's almost like dealing with a first time home buyer, but, you're helping them start their new successful business and kind of start their new life and stuff like that. So we do a lot with, first time startup businesses. We've done stuff with bigger corporations. I've done, multifamily, we've done churches, like, all sorts of cool stuff. And so each project's different. Each project's has something different to it. And so we just kind of have to adapt to every single project that we do. And also kind of, some of them like restaurants, we have a franchise that we represent right now and their stuff is pretty close to the same every single time.
Okay.
So for them, it's like, we find the right spot and get them in the right area. And then it's just kind of the same transaction each time, versus if we're, dealing with like a church that might have different needs, might have, different financing, stuff like that. So,
Gotcha.
Certain things can be different, almost every project's different, but there are some, tenants that go in multiple locations and for them, they have their, not cookie cutter, but they have their designs that they do. They have their needs and we know what those needs are. And so we meet those every time.
Awesome.
So,
and then over here on the right, we've got Scott Sufak. How come you're not flying planes right now?
There's only so much time in the day.
I heard you have a pilot's license.
I do. Yes.
Okay. Do you use it?
Not as often as I'd like, but I do still have a license. Yeah.
Okay. Any type of particular wing that you like to scoot around the air?
I belong to an aero club here, so we get to rent planes from them and take them out. Most of them are, single engine Cessna type airplanes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is your last name Greek too?
No, my last name is Czech.
Okay. It's pretty, there's no funky, like little wedges or anything like on top of any of your letters.
No, nothing like that.
It's just Sufak.
That's right.
Sufak, is that pronounced properly?
That's right. Yep. Try to keep it simple.
Nice. You didn't really have much of a choice in it, but you're holding up the legacy.
That's
doing
right.
a well job too.
Thanks.
What do you do here?
I'm a full-time professional residential realtor. So we help our clients, buyers and sellers, try to get the best opportunity that they can when they're buying or selling a house. We work with land, we work with multifamily, but primarily like first-time home buyers, military, but really it's anything that you can live in is something that we're going to be able to handle. Kyle handles the commercial, that kind of aspect of things, and then we do residential.
Awesome. Right at the beginning, as we're getting started here, is there any compliance things that you need to get out? For example, like I do have my mortgage license. My NMLS number is 2260838. Is there anything in the real estate industry you guys need to kind of throw out there for compliance purposes?
I don't remember my license number, but I'm a
it's
licensed,
written somewhere.
I'm licensed in real estate and to
just Colorado.
Just Colorado.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm not an attorney, by the way. So.
Hey, full disclosures right now. We're getting
throw that one.
We're getting this out there.
Yes.
Anything for you, Scott? Compliance related? We need to get out.
No, I was originally licensed out in Boston, and then
really
I've been licensed here in Colorado since 2005.
Okay. Do you still carry your license in Boston?
No, this was just while I was in college out there.
Okay.
So,
how long ago did you let that one go to sleep?
It probably expired 3 years after I got it, so it was, I think 2005 was about when that one expired.
Okay, so you've been in this business for quite a while.
Longer than I care to admit to most people.
I only got my license in January 2022, okay. So I'm relatively new right now, depending on when you're watching this. What year did you get your license in, Kyle?
Oh gosh, it was
the first one.
Well, real estate license is good for both, residential and commercial.
Okay, gotcha.
So, but I got my license back, I think 2013. I'd have to.
All right.
Back. It's been a little over a decade now.
So you can be like Scott's little brother in real estate.
Pretty much.
I'm the baby.
So wait,
still.
I gotta ask.
I look up to Kyle though.
Physically, literally.
Physically, yeah. Everybody looks up to me physically. So,
I'm like this when I look at you.
I hate going to the grocery store because I got to get stuff off the top shelf for everybody. So
shoot, remind me when you're going to the grocery store so I can get there.
I don't. That's just so.
Okay. Have you ever hit your head on any doors?
Yeah.
Like how frequently is that a occurrence?
I've got a ceiling fan that sticks down in my living room and cracks me like probably once a week.
Really?
Oh yeah, and I forget about it, and then I hit it again, so or I'll be chasing one of the kids around the main level, and then just kind of
that's awesome.
Gets me. So
that's awesome.
I got to ask Scott one thing though.
Go, please do.
Are you a Celtics fan then?
No, afraid not.
I was gonna say that might be the NBA.
Yeah, they were pretty. Larry Bird.
Celtics,
made an impact with that team, turned them into a dynasty.
Yes, they did.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So on today's show, we're going to really look into the world of real estate. And there is a lot been going on for longer than the general public knows, longer than I know. I just heard about this in the last probably few months. Scott, you have a pretty hefty role here in Colorado Springs as a business professional, right?
I am a business professional. I do run the Sufak team here at Remax Real Estate Group, and I've served on the RSC board for a number of years as well.
And what does what is RSV?
RSC.
What is RSC?
Realtor Services Corporation is our MLS. They are the for-profit arm of PPAR, the Pikes Peak Association of Realtors, that works with things that make money. So that would be our MLS, our lock boxes, and those other services that go along.
Like lock boxes that you put on the door handle with the keys?
That's right.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I know there's the electric ones, and And realtors are like, oh yeah, they're a pain in the butt because sometimes I don't have the Wi-Fi and I hit it and I got to run to the end of the driveway and come back and get it in time. And like,
yeah, that was the old ones. So these new ones don't
they're
have
better.
that problem. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's part of the reason why we replaced them.
Good to know. Oh, you were part of that.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we did.
Thank you. If you're a real estate agent watching this, you can thank Scott Sufak and his team for making sure you don't got to run back and forth on the driveways.
Yeah, just to clarify, not my team.
I'm sorry,
board.
not your team.
Yeah.
Okay, so the RSC board, again, it was the real estate what?
Real Estate Services Corporation.
Okay, and then for, I know what an MLS is, but I really don't know what it means. What does MLS stand for and what is it?
MLS is Multiple Listing Service, and it is a centralized database where we collect all the properties to find, so the public has a central database so that they can search properties. So by putting a marketplace out there, a central marketplace, it allows a good place to put properties for sale, and then also a good place for buyers to find properties for sale.
Now, I've always thought that only realtors can access the MLS.
There has been in the past, realtors were the ones that primarily accessed the MLS with a few exceptions. So sometimes appraisers and sometimes other people who have a need for that data can subscribe to that service. But we did get some changes this year. Maybe it was late last year, or early this year. I think it was this year, where we did change to allow non-realtors to be full members of the MLS.
So like me, I'm not a realtor. And this is the first I'm hearing of it. It's just the way you're explaining it brought it to mind, or to ask a question. Like, I don't have to go to Zillow. I don't have to go to realtor.com or Redfin to look at a property address. I can go to PPAR and look up some property info.
If you'd like to subscribe to the service and do an application and sign up, yes, then you can become a member as well.
Okay, so to access it, you have to be a member. But I could get access.
Yes, you no longer have to be a realtor to be a member.
Got it.
Whereas you did in the past.
So that's one of the things I'm excited about having you on this interviews, because of your familiarity.
We know where you're going.
You know what I'm saying? Your familiarness with like the legal aspects, and if you've heard of NAR or lawsuits that's been happening, Scott, can you kick us off with what is going on generally with NAR, kind of how we got where we're at, what it is, and then we're going to start going from there.
Okay. Yeah. So there was multiple lawsuits a few years ago. They were started.
When you say a few years ago, like what would be a year-ish time frame?
I believe it was around 2017, but I don't know that.
Right.
For sure.
We could be give or take 2 years, like 2017, 19, 20, maybe. Okay.
Yeah. I'm afraid I don't have the exact date on that one.
We're not going to take you to court on that one.
I appreciate that. Yeah, somebody else will.
Is that just the life of a real estate agent?
Yes, it's very litigious. We were told that from the first time we got licenses, so that's not really a surprise.
All right, so back to NAR.
Yeah, so National Association of Realtors, or NAR, has been the advocate for the realtor organization. So they are the ones that are representing the realtors together in Congress for lobbying efforts, but also advocating for property rights for buyers and sellers. So those have all been the overarching focuses of the organization, to provide a professional organization that provides a framework and rules, but also provides a code of ethics and a path for buyers and sellers to have a clear path forward on properties where they know they're going to be accurately represented, honestly represented, and professionally served. NAR had some people concerned. Well, one of the practices that we had as part of NAR was an obligation in the MLS to post cooperating to post compensation for a cooperating brokerage. So that, contrary to popular belief, was not a fixed percentage. So that has always been negotiable, but there was a requirement to put some amount in the MLS. It could be $0, it could be $1, it could be 1%, it could be $1,000, it could be 10%. But there was an obligation to put an amount in there. Now, this lawsuit that has been in the media now is really a result of that requirement.
Now, what is the lawsuit exactly that we're talking about?
It's an anti-competitive lawsuit that was known as the, I believe this one was Sitzer-Burnett. So
that's an individual?
Merle,
or was it a company?
Merle, Sitzer, and Burnett. No, they're individuals. They're people. So these lawsuits basically claimed that the realtors were having uncompetitive practices by price fixing, and that we were steering buyers away from properties that were not paying the full compensation that we were charging. So, for instance, a buyer who's working with an agent should, in best practice, be signing a buyer's agency agreement with that person. That way they know between the two of them how much that agent is going to charge, where they're going to collect that money from, and what services they're going to offer in exchange for that.
That's the claim that was made.
That is the way that it did work, is that we were supposed to be doing these. But in all states, a buyer agency agreement isn't a requirement in advance. So that isn't necessarily something that was being discussed with the buyers by all practitioners.
Because it changes state by state.
It does change by state, but even through some states, I believe there's only 13 states right now that actually require a buyer agency agreement.
Oh.
So most of the states don't actually require one. But that meant that there was a gap there where those buyers may not actually understand how their agent is being compensated and what their duties are. So these changes are trying to advocate for those consumers, both the buyers and the sellers, to make sure that they understand what the agent duties are, how those agents are being paid, and how much they're being paid. Now, that avenue was available in the past through a buyer agency agreement, but it wasn't being required. Okay. So part of the changes moving forward is now that buyer agency agreement or some alternative written agreement is going to be required so that the buyer understands the duties of their agent and how they're being compensated.
What about brokerage disclosure to buyer and stuff like that? I feel like a lot of agents were doing like brokerage disclosure to buyer, brokerage disclosures, and then definition of working relationships kind of, and then I feel like a lot of agents were just doing the exclusive right to buy once they found a property. And
that was pretty common practice for a lot of agents out there.
That way, so.
And I don't actually know moving forward if those brokerage disclosures and the definitions of working relationships will be sufficient. The lawsuit from the way that it reads, or the settlement from the way that it reads, appears that we will have to have a written agreement with that buyer. It doesn't specifically say that it be a buyer agency agreement. So it could be a transaction broker agreement. It could be a customer agreement. I don't actually know what that final form will take. It would be nice if we had a single page document that we could go over relatively quickly with the buyer, and that just covered the highlights and say, these are the main points. And we have some things that are pretty close to that, but we don't actually have an official document that I'm aware of that actually covers all those bases.
So buyer agency agreement is actually a technical term.
It is a technical term. It's a relationship. At least in this state, it is a specific relationship that the buyer and that broker have together. And that requires compensation, and it also requires duties to be performed on both sides.
Okay.
Well, and a lot of times too, like, especially in our world, you'll see, we meet other brokers at the property. We'll meet, prospective tenants or prospective buyers at the property sometimes don't have a broker with them. And that's where we're handing them that brokerage disclosure to buyer to kind of let them know that we have the agency with the seller and where they stand in the whole thing, whether they're a customer or, if we're transaction broker with the seller, maybe we're transaction broker with the buyer or something like that, just to let them know before we even enter the building.
Okay. So that's a general, like, kind of intro to what is going on, right? Where things were.
That's half of it. The other major half is that in the MLS, where we used to put whatever that cooperating compensation was, that's no longer going to be allowed. So now we still will have an agreement with our buyers that allows them or tells them exactly what the compensation amount is that the buyer agent would charge. But we don't know if the seller is willing to cover that compensation. In the past, that amount was listed in the MLS, so we knew if it was covered or not, or if we had to make arrangements for the buyer to make up the difference.
Because the buyer agency agreement would be between the buyer's agent and the buyer, not the person listing their home with their listing agent.
That's correct. That would be a listing agreement, which is a separate document entirely.
Okay.
Two different clients too.
Yeah. Because in probably about 3 weeks ago is when I learned that the way, okay, tell me if I'm correct, because this is what I understand. What's been, and I don't want to use this word normal because I just found out normal in real estate is like this, even when it comes to commissions.
Normal is abnormal.
Yeah, abnormal. What is has been often practice is that, like, for example, if I'm going to use 5.5% is like a commission that a seller's going to pay a listing agent. When the deal closes, the listing agent will actually split that 5.5 with the buyer's agent. And then when you go to the closing table and the buyer gets their keys, that's when title funds the portion of the seller's commission paying to the listing agent. And then the amount that they're splitting with the buyer's agent, that portion they just wire straight or check over to the buyer's agent. Is that a good understanding of how things have often been practiced, or am I off base a little bit?
It's not always split, but
okay.
There is an amount of compensation that's being offered to the buyer's agent's brokerage in most cases. Like I said before, sometimes it could be zero. It might be $1, might be a flat fee, or it could be a percentage. 1, 2, 3%.
Like if your dad or you're getting a house for your daughter and you want to take care of her, you say, you know what, you can pay me $1 and I'll represent you, and then we'll buy you a house. Is that a good example?
That is a good example.
Okay. So you can still get paid technically, but it's your daughter.
Yes.
So you're going to take care of her.
Which is an important point, because as much as we would like to sometimes to work for free, we cannot. Our insurance does not allow us to work for free. So legally. So we cannot just, like, there are circumstances that might come up where a buyer is not able to pay the compensation and the seller is unwilling to pay the compensation. And we cannot move forward in that circumstance and help pro bono.
So that roadblock or speed or wall has already existed.
That has already existed. It exists because of our insurance. It's our E&O insurance that doesn't cover us.
So what would happen if you did help or represent someone for free and something went sideways?
You'd be liable for anything that went sideways. You have no errors and omissions insurance to protect you.
So that minimum $1 payment covers you as a business professional.
Well, I'm not an attorney, but that's my understanding.
Sorry. Yeah. Remember, we got a disclosures.
Still not an attorney. Yeah.
You might want to just put a thing on the bottom that just says not attorney.
Ticker tape the whole time. Not an attorney, not an attorney.
Yeah. But no, that is one of the hazards that we're running into, because we haven't really touched on it yet, but VA buyers are not allowed to pay for any of their buyer's agent compensation.
Yeah, Kyle's really, really animated about that. I wanted to get with him on that in just a sec. So there's these lawsuits that have been settled. Right now we're at Remax Real Estate Group in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Remax was a member of these was it in Texas?
Remax was a member, wasn't a named defendant in the lawsuit. And Remax did decide to settle earlier before the National Association of Realtors did.
Okay.
So Remax was an early party to settle.
Who were the parties and defendants in the lawsuits?
I don't remember all of them, but it was most of the major brokerage firms out there. Century 21, Anywhere Real Estate, Remax.
Is Keller Williams in there?
I don't remember.
Don't know. EXP maybe or no? EXP was in there?
I don't know if they were named in the first lawsuit or the second lawsuit.
Oh, so there's multiples.
Yeah, there's a couple of different phases to it, I guess.
Okay.
Merle, Sitzer, Burnett, all three of those are kind of lined up.
Those are separate lawsuits?
Well, they started separate, and then it appears that they've been combined over the years. Again,
not attorneys, but there's a lot of legal stuff that has been pouring into this.
And started locally in Missouri and Chicago, and then some of the other ones have branched out farther nationwide. But it's my understanding that those have all been rolled into this settlement. So those three have been rolled into this settlement.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that there aren't potentially others down the road in the future. On the buying side, these all address the concerns of home sellers feeling that they were, that it was an antitrust violation.
Okay.
And it all comes down to tying of that compensation. So the tying of the buyer's agent's compensation with the listing agent's compensation. So as the listing agent collects compensation from that seller, a portion of that, like you said, is then shared with the buyer's agent. And that is where this all stems from. This whole lawsuit and all of these all come from that tying of that compensation. So one of the settlements, or one of the aspects of the settlement, is that those will be decoupled. So the listing agent will no longer necessarily have to pay the buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent will either need to collect their compensation from the listing broker or from their buyer, but they cannot count on a set flat fee amount from the listing agent being posted in the MLS.
Okay. Now that has not been made a ruling yet, has it?
Well, the settlement is preliminarily agreed to by the parties.
Oh, gotcha.
But now there is...
so that would be like the big players that settled, they agreed to play by whatever that settlement ruling is preliminarily.
Yeah, it's not quite that simple, unfortunately, because there's some of the biggest players are still not settled.
Oh, gotcha.
So some of those that are outside of the NAR umbrella, or the very large brokerage firms that were not part of that settlement, may still have some future lawsuits coming their way.
Okay.
So that's not totally resolved yet.
Now, is RE/MAX agents, is it kind of resolved?
RE/MAX should be pretty well resolved, at least for these three major suits, the Sitzer, Merle, and Burnett suits.
Gotcha.
We should be shielded from any additional liability on that, both from the RE/MAX settlement, but also from the NAR settlement. They both cover us.
So what we see right now, I can generally say that if a seller wants to sell a house, but they say, we don't want to pay the buyer's commission, we're only going to pay you listing agent. Scott, I'm going to hire you as my listing agent. But I only want to pay your commission, and I only want to pay this much. And then Kyle comes along as the buyer's agent, and I tell him, I don't want to pay your compensation. That, from what we're seeing from these lawsuits, is a potential occurrence that could happen.
Yeah, it's really not a result of the lawsuits, though, because that's always been the case.
Oh, okay.
The commissions have always been negotiable. This doesn't change what's negotiable or what's not negotiable. They've always been negotiable. So what this really changes is where that compensation can be posted. So now it can be posted on our personal website. We can put it in marketing materials, but it can no longer be posted in the MLS. The concern was that, now, I do not believe that this was a legitimate concern because I have not seen it in my decades of real estate practice. But the legal argument was that the buyer's agents are steering their clients away from the properties that charge less and directing them to the ones that pay them more.
That's what the claim is?
That was the claim.
But not necessarily true.
I've not seen that in my business. That's not the way that we work locally. That's not the way we're trained to work. And it would also go against not only our MLS rules, but it would also be a violation of our code of ethics.
So also go against your fiduciary responsibilities to your buyer as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I have never seen anybody work that way. I can't say that nobody did it. Obviously, somebody must have done it because it's a concern. but it was not something that I have ever seen locally here in our market or even in the Boston market when I worked out there.
It's always the few rotten apples that ruin it for the whole basket.
Yeah.
Every once in a while.
And so that compensation that was being offered, whether it was $0 or $1 or 1,000 or whatever, that can no longer be posted in the MLS.
Okay. What, that is actually quite enlightening, because originally, like when I saw you, Kyle, maybe a couple of weeks ago, and I heard you talking about like how it's going to impact VA buyers. And I didn't even think about what we call a non-allowable. Like if you're a VA borrower, you're not allowed to pay. You're a buying agent. And there's things you can't pay as a VA borrower, and it's to protect their interest.
Right.
For people who think, and I'm throwing this out there because I know everyone starts having their interpretations of what they hear from the news or the rulings or whatever's going on. Kyle, what happens if a buyer is forced to pay their real estate agent that's representing them when they're a VA borrower?
They can't.
And why is that?
And I may be a commercial real estate broker, but I'm definitely in tune with the residential side as well. But with VA borrowers, it's non-allowable. VA does not allow their borrowers to pay certain fees. And as a lender, you know more about what those fees are. But one of those fees is commission. And so for VA borrowers, they're going to have the seller pay their commission on their behalf because they can't pay it. And, and if they're not able to pay commission, and not even $1, like they're not allowed to pay commission, period. And then they're allowed, certain amount of concessions as well. They're allowed up to like 4% on concessions and stuff like that. So that's going to be interesting to see if sellers are not allowing, or not paying commission. Are they going to even be able to put VA terms on the MLS? And are they going to be able to do any of that if they're writing, no commission, no buyer's agent into their seller's brokerage agreement, and the seller's broker's not willing to split any of their comp on that? Are they, I feel like they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot, because there's a lot, especially here. I mean, we got a lot of military bases.
Yeah.
And
Fort Carson,
so much military
Peterson.
Here. Yep. And so it'll be interesting
Shriver's
to find
not that
out
far away. Academy's right
NAR
there.
and all these other organizations are going to want to handle this. Is this going to be a lender issue? Is this going to be, because it's going to come up. Eventually it's going to come up. I mean, eventually you're going to have sellers that's going to dig their feet in and say, we're not paying a comp to a buyer's broker.
I had it happen last week.
Did you have it? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In negotiating initial contract or
listing agent was not paying any buyer broker compensation
at all.
Working with the buyer's agent, who I'm working with as a buyer's agent with a VA buyer. They're not allowed to cover the compensation. And so we wrote it into the offer, but the seller rejected it, and we were dead in the water. We couldn't move forward on that house, at least not with me representing that buyer. They would have to move forward on their own without representation.
Oh, because of the whole E&O thing.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Well, I feel like that's going to open up a Pandora's box with a lot of these VA buyers is kind of how I feel about it. Like I said, I'm not an attorney, but just like Scott said, it's already happening where they're saying we're not going to pay a comp to buyer's broker. Well, a lot of VA guys, I mean, I love the military. They're smart. They're great. But they know how to do what they do, and trying to bring them through the housing process is, a lot of these guys are first time home buyers. A lot of these guys and women are first time home buyers. And so they're not up to speed with, what it takes to do that. And I feel like if they're going in underrepresented, it's a huge disservice to our military. They need somebody there to battle for them. They need somebody there to walk them through the process. They need somebody there to protect them and make sure that they're good through this whole process. And I feel like by doing this, it's going to be really tough on VA buyers if they're not able to get that representation because the seller's not willing to offer a comp on that, or a seller's broker's not willing to split a comp on that and stuff like that. So I feel like it's going to be really, it's gonna be really hard on our VA guys. The ones that they definitely they fight for our country. They need somebody to fight for them when they're trying to find a property here. So
you've been on both sides of the residential and commercial fence, and you've shared with me before the uniqueness of the commercial side. Can you give us a picture of what that looks like when you enter into contracts for real estate for companies or individuals?
We've never really had a spot where commission's posted. We always, when we're submitting a LOI for a tenant, or we're doing
LOI being a letter of intent.
Yeah, letter of intent for a tenant, or we're doing a contract. We'll put something down for what we're asking for in commission, and sometimes that might not be what the seller's broker, the landlord's broker has worked out with the landlord or the seller. And so they might come back to us with, maybe a red line on the LOI that says,
when you say red line, is that like crossing something out?
Yeah, they're crossing it out. And then they're saying, all right, well, the comp that we have negotiated is 2% for the total lease, or, whatever. And so, that's where we can go to our buyers. I mean, I normally don't. I just, I'm like, all right, hey, I got a 2% comp with these guys, we're good. Let's just move forward.
Is that a 2% for both agents, or just for you?
I mean, they might have something worked out completely different for their side.
Oh,
we don't know that. I mean,
okay.
Unless you see the settlement statement, on the tenant side, you'll never see that. But, if it's a sale, you might see that they might be making more. So they might have something worked out that they're making more. So but we don't know that. And that's not what's important on that.
Yeah. So, you do listing and selling in the commercial realm.
Absolutely.
And then you also like handle leases or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. And then, so in each of those, whether you're working a lease or a sell or a buy of commercial property, you're getting a compensation with your client.
And it's totally negotiable. I mean, there's some cases where, we'll do a lease, tenant takes occupancy right away. Landlord's okay with cutting us a full check for our full commission right then and there. And at the time of occupancy. So we'll send them a bill, basically. We'll send them an invoice, and then they'll send a check to our office, and they'll make that check out to Remax Real Estate Group, and they'll send that to our office, and then it's dispersed to us from there. But there's other times where maybe you got a tenant, they're doing a whole build out on a space, and they're getting a space that's in gray shell, which means that it's like down to the studs, or it's down to, just some walls in there or something like that. And they have to do a full build out on a space. Really common with restaurant and retail clients, stuff like that. And in those cases, sometimes the landlord's gonna be like, well, we're going to pay you half at lease signing, and then you'll get the other half when they take occupancy. Or we'll give you the full thing at occupancy, and you guys got to wait through the whole thing, So it really depends on how we negotiate it with them. I mean, there's some times where, if you're doing a 10-year deal, the landlord might say, hey, we'll give you 3% for the first 5 and then 2% for the last 5. And this is how, we're going to pay you on this. And so it's all up for negotiation. It's always been negotiated on our side, and we've always, we've sent out commission letters too. And that's another thing that we've used as far as when we send the contract over, we have a commission letter going over saying, hey, this is how much we expect to get paid. We have the other broker sign that. And then we don't even put it in the contract. There is a certain way you can put it in the contract. And if you want to get that verbiage, you can definitely, look up way on that. I don't like to, so I don't want to get it 100% wrong. We have it kind of copied and pasted for verbiage on that.
Cause you've been doing it so long,
and stuff like that. So we have a way to put the verbiage in that's already there.
So sounds like a commission in the commercial world is not a constant number. It's really a variable.
No, absolutely.
Like X is more appropriate, and that X can represent.
I wouldn't say that commission is a constant number in real estate, period. I mean,
I wouldn't say it is in the residential market either. Yep.
It's always been up for, negotiation between both parties. It's always been up for negotiation with seller's broker and seller.
Now, is that just Colorado, or is that pretty much, that's nationwide?
Everywhere.
Yeah, we can't speak for other states. I mean, I'm licensed in other states, but it's pretty
from
standard
the network that you guys have and other
No, I can
realtors?
tell you it's negotiable
Okay.
everywhere across the country.
Gotcha.
That it has to be. Otherwise, it's antitrust violations.
So kids stay in school so you know your
Scott
algebra, the difference between constant numbers and variables. So I've heard that number 6% come across a lot in conversation the last 2 weeks specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one can say real estate commission is 6% and agents are they have the right to get their 3% on either side.
No, 6 isn't even the average. So 6 is just a number that people like to put out there, but most of the average is somewhere around 5.5, 5.6% nationwide.
Okay.
And that's total compensation. So that's split. That's between the buyer's side and the seller side. So you've got at least two different brokers that are going to be involved. That sometimes more. You may have managing brokers, you may have teams, you have other ways to split. So it's really a misconception that
don't forget the tax man.
Of course, the tax man too.
Uncle Sam always got to jump in there.
And it's different. Like for me personally, I can't speak for others, but I don't necessarily charge the same amount for every house. If I have a house that's a $2 million house and it's going to take a lot of advertising, it's going to be on the market for a long time, the expenses are going to be higher, I'm probably going to charge more on that house. So it doesn't depend necessarily on just the person or the individual. It's a lot of different factors come into play. The market conditions, competition that's on the market, as well as other realtors. So all of those things will come into play, and the price point of the house too. Sometimes it's going to take more money to market that house, and it'll take more time. And in other cases, it may not take as much, and that you feel that you can charge a little bit less in that case and make yourself more competitive. So it's always been negotiable.
And on our side, I mean, a lot of times, like we're paying like upwards of $2,000 to get a building on the market. I mean, we've got 10-page offering memorandums that we're sending out on certain properties. We've got, signage. A lot of times we have to order a new sign. Some of these properties that we're working on, like I've got one that's got big piece of land right now that's on the market, and my sign has the acreage on it. My sign is customized to that property. And so you're talking $800 for the sign, and then another $200, installation. You're talking $1,000 just for the signage. And if we're going to put any banners up, or if we're going to do, our offering memorandums, a couple $100 to have that done. And honestly, we're working on that with the digital guys, and guys and girls, I should say. And, and at the end of the day, they're, we're working together on that. I'm giving them what I need put in there. They're putting it all together. They're making the artwork happen. And so I'm paying them for that side. And so there's a lot of money put into listing a property. And same thing goes for these guys on the residential side. They're putting a lot of money into what they're marketing, and they might be highlighting things on different websites, or they might be paying a monthly subscription to do that kind of stuff. They're paying for their flyers. They're paying for a lot of different marketing materials. So that definitely has to be taken into consideration when you're listing a property. So
if a seller wants to sell their commercial property by themselves and they're not going to come talk to you and get all of that signage and the digital connections and whatnot, how does that impact their success?
I think it impacts their success quite a bit. I mean, there's a lot of relationships in our realm of things, and we're constantly talking to brokers that we know. And I mean, here in Colorado Springs, at least, it's a very small community on the commercial side, and we all are connected with each other in some way. And there's certain brokers that specialize in certain things, and there's certain brokers that specialize in other things. And there's some brokers that kind of do a little bit of everything. And so it's, we're talking all the time. So if we know certain brokers have investors, we're going to send them, information on a property that might be an investment property. Multifamily, there's a couple brokers that specialize in multifamily. If we're dealing with a multifamily situation, then we know that we want to reach out to those brokers right away and see if they have any buyers on that. But at the same token, we're marketing it all over the place, but we're reaching out to certain brokers that specialize in certain areas to see if they have buyers for that stuff as well. I mean, we're doing basically everything we can to bring a contract to the table for our sellers. And that's the important part. And so, I mean, anybody can slap their stuff on CoStar or LoopNet and pay the subscription.
LoopNet, I've heard of that before.
That's another subscription that we have. I mean, like I probably pay $500-600 a month to LoopNet just for my properties. It's $100 a month per property that we put in there, and we've got a few right now that are in there, and so we have to subscribe to that. So that's another expense that we're tacking onto that. That's a 12-month commitment. So there's $1,200 right there. There's a lot of different things like that we have those expenses on, but I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, a seller could do that. But are they going to price it right? Are they going to, are they going to be able to track down that right user? I mean, you can easily, it's just like on the residential side, you probably put your stuff in Zillow and, do for sale by owner, but there's another aspect to it that we really network properties. We do broker e-blast. We do, a lot of outreach seller brokers to try and bring those buyers in and to, try and do our job as a, and I shouldn't say try, like we do our job as listing
you're
brokers
working hard
to bring that stuff. I mean, that piece of land, for example, we're calling and talking to like Lowe's real estate team and Home Depot's real estate team and trying to see if there's any, or all these corporate companies to see if there's any interest in that area. And so we're reaching out to their teams and seeing if there's any interest, if there's something that they want to, are looking for in that area. And that's where we're presenting that. And we're making those calls and tracking those people down. And
that's a whole world that I never even thought of.
That our sellers too busy to do. I mean, our seller is hiring us to do that. And so we're tracking those people down and saying who would be a good fit. Like what's the zoning of this property and what will the zoning allow for, and so, to allow for X use, Y use, Z use, what's the allowed uses on this property. And that's a big factor too. And so those are going to be more of the groups that we want to target on that stuff, is because they're already allowed to use that property for that use, whether it be an industrial user, whether it be a retail user or whatever,
Have you ever come across any sellers that are trying to sell a commercial property on their own, or come across buyers trying to buy on their own?
I mean, there's a couple.
How does that impact the deal that you usually end up doing?
I mean, I would say that we have a lot more tenants and buyers approaching us that are unrepresented than we do sellers.
Okay.
A lot of times sellers, want to use, they have their broker they want to use. They don't want to deal with it as much. And so they'd rather have a broker take
wizened to the process and accepted, just let the professionals handle it.
I'd say like when we list something for lease or something like that, we have a lot more unrepresented tenants that will call us and want to see the property. Same thing with, for sale properties. We'll have that with buyers a lot too. So it definitely happens a lot more on that side than anything.
So, I mean, when I'm hearing you guys talking, they're two different animals, but it sounds like the same process is generally taking place on both sides of the commercial and residential fence. It's just being described differently.
It's going to be a lot more similar in the future. After the settlement is approved, then the residential world will look a lot more like the commercial world.
And when you say approved, like who does the approving on that?
Well, the agreement was signed on March 15th
of this year. Oh, that's really recent.
Right. That just last month.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was when the settlement agreement was signed, but it hasn't gotten court approval on that yet. So end of March, early April, they're filing the motion for preliminary approval. We anticipate September timeframe. We should get, the courts should do the preliminary approval on that. And then by December, we're hoping that we actually have a final signed settlement where everything is said and done.
So You've said before to me that NAR, National Association of Realtors, is not a legal entity, right? They're not part of the legal system of the United States. They're an association.
Yeah, they're a professional organization.
They're a professional organization.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that there's no current law regarding how commissions are paid. Am I asking that?
NAR, the National Association of Realtors, does not have laws at all. They have guidelines, but none of them are in regard to amount of compensation.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they reposted the guidelines after the settlement just to make sure everybody understood commissions have always been negotiable.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Is there an easy place for people to look up that, like a website or something that it's posted?
Facts.realtor is probably the easiest single spot.
Okay.
FACTS.realtor.
Like real facts.
Facts. Right.
Not made up thoughts.
Correct.
Okay.
Facts.realtor.
That's a good, remember that. That's a good, man, facts are thrown around and like interpreted all nowadays so crazily.
And there is still some ambiguity out there, some questions that remain to be answered, but most of the Q&A can be found on there with reasonable answers that give us clear guidance moving forward on what expectations we need to be meeting.
So how does that, if I understand correctly, like all of this is, Dave Kircher's looking at us through the window. What's up, Dave? It's fun being around Remax Real Estate Group. I heard it's top 50 Remax in the nation. Like, you guys really crank it out here and take care of your clients.
It wouldn't surprise me. I haven't heard that number yet, but
it's like a rough number I heard. Don't hold me against that. I mean, there's like 330 million people in our country, I think, somewhere around there.
I don't know.
Yeah, so it's big. Yeah. I'm
not an attorney, a tax advisor, or a statistician.
Neither am I. That was anyways, back to the point. You had mentioned, so for NAR, facts.realtor. Facts.realtor.com. They posted up. So anyone in the country.
Not .com. Just facts.realtor.
Facts.realtor. Oh, yeah. Realtor is a domain.
Correct.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Facts.realtor. That's good. So you can check that out if you want to see what's going on here, especially if you've been following the mainstream media. I will say personally, I am not a fan of the mainstream media. They tend to blow things. Well, from my perspective, they blow up things It's
been a very inaccurate narrative recently, to say the least. It's a little frustrating to hear about all the misinformation that is just being regurgitated out there.
You have clients that come up to you and say, hey, this is what I heard, and then you have to correct them?
Not as many as I expected.
Okay.
But there have been a few people that have asked me about it, and then we have to clarify a little bit better.
So what are some of the general things that they come to you with?
Well, the biggest thing that even the president said it, now the realtor fees are no longer fixed at 6%.
But we talked earlier that there is no fixed number.
Never been fixed.
It's a variable.
Yeah, that's correct. So that's really the most frustrating narrative, in my opinion, is that they keep reiterating the fact that now real estate commissions are negotiable, but they've always been negotiable. And what that leads to is now there's narrative that says that the rates and the fees are going to go down and the prices of housing are going to go down. But the reality is they were already at the market rates. They were only being controlled by natural supply and demand market forces. So I don't personally anticipate a lot of commission changes in the future. We may see some market adjustments, but I don't think it's going to be the groundbreaking, earth-shattering changes that they are all hyping up, because they've always been negotiable, and people pay what they're worth, and realtors earn what they're worth. So if you are not worth what you're getting, then people are going to stop hiring you. And
I mean, that's basic, like
it,
capitalism.
you're going to keep getting it.
Right. Yeah. I just was talking to someone yesterday, and I didn't realize can a real estate agent work by the hour?
Yes, absolutely. That's always been an option. You can do a flat fee. You can do an hourly rate. You can do a retainer.
So why don't a retainer? How does a retainer work?
They would pay like $2,000 a month, and then you would work towards that work however many hours towards your retainer amount.
And then once that retainer's hit, then the buyer or seller decides if they want to pay another $2,000?
Correct.
Okay.
And these models have always been available. Flat fee has been available.
They've been on the contract for years.
Yeah. I mean, these have always
and it's
been
all negotiable.
It's always negotiable. Now, that's also a little bit of a challenge that I have when everybody says it's negotiable. It is negotiable. My fees are negotiable, but that doesn't mean I'm going to negotiate my fees.
Oh,
they are negotiable.
Wait a minute.
But
I want to work for you for
line.
50% of what I normally charge.
That's exactly right. So just because my fees are negotiable doesn't mean I'm going to start cutting my fees.
That'd be like going to King Soopers and like grabbing the pork meat out of the back, walking them to the front and say, hey, this is $2 a pound or $5 a pound or whatever, say, I only want to pay $1.
Yes. So when we say that they're negotiable, that means that you can check with one realtor and they'll charge one amount, and you check with another realtor and they'll charge a different amount.
So it's pretty
and
subjective.
By the way, they'll have different services and different levels of experience, different knowledge that they can bring to the table, different resources that they have available. So all of those things will come into play when you're talking about compensation.
Well, and there's also brokers that have different brokerage splits and stuff like that with their brokerages that they have to pay, stuff like that. So that's all a factor in, what they're doing. And it's how much time are you going to put in this listing? How much money are you going to put into this listing out of your own pocket? And when we're putting money into a listing, we're gambling if that's going to sell or not. I never have a problem with it selling, but at the end of the day, like if it's a tough property, that's going to be a real hard property to sell.
You got to find that right buyer.
I want to take on because, am I going to dump $2,000-$3,000 in this? This thing's going to sit for 2 years because it's nowhere where anybody wants to buy a property yet. So at the end of the day, is it actually even worth it sometimes? So.
Yeah. So, why then? Because it seems like it's possibly the most normal part about real estate is people pay a commission percentage as opposed to doing an hourly rate. Is that probably the most common?
Yeah, that's common. That's
the most common. Is retainer common at all, or is that?
I've never seen it. I mean, it's an option, but I've never seen anybody work with that model.
So what's the advantage of doing a commission based instead of paying hourly or retainer?
Well, it depends on who you're asking. So if you're asking a seller, why would you do that? Well, the seller is going to have, they don't want their house to be on the market forever. They want to make sure that there's some incentive to get that house sold, and they want to get top dollar for it.
So the sooner the real estate agent gets that house sold, the sooner they can get paid, and the more they can do that frequently, that's the incentive for them to get that darn house sold.
Time can definitely be one of the factors. Price would be another factor.
Okay.
They want to get more money for the house, and how do you get more money? More eyeballs on that house, more exposure, more advertising, marketing.
I didn't even think about that.
So if you're doing a for sale by owner, they're typically not selling for as much as a realtor represented property. The biggest
simply
reason
because
for that
of what
is the exposure.
They're paying for the marketing.
Well, not necessarily. It's the exposure. Part of what they're paying for is that exposure because they're hiring a realtor who has access to the MLS and a large set of buyer eyes can be put onto that listing. Whereas opposed to if you just have a sign in the yard and there isn't the central database to market it, you're only going to be exposing it to the eyes that drive by that sign.
Gotcha.
And Scott, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, a lot of for sale by owners, a lot of times kind of go off that Zillow's estimate, and that price might not be right on with what the actual market value is. And
sellers get their prices from all different dubious sources.
Right.
Often the neighbor down the street or the house across the neighborhood that sold for way more, and it's twice the size.
I did do an open house.
$200,000 neighborhood.
I did do an open house a couple of times recently, same house, and the first time someone stopped by and they were just kind of wanting to get a idea on what the price of the house was and what was inside of that value. Because I didn't. Oh no, I didn't have cookies. That was the problem, huh? Yeah. No, but they walked away and they were like, yeah, we think we want to sell and move in 2 years. So we wanted to see what the value of the house was so we could have an idea. And I was like, okay, that's helpful. And then the next time I did it, like a neighbor from half a mile up the street came down and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to I'm selling my house right now, but I just want to get an idea of what you guys are selling for, because it's basically the same house. And that was like the only traffic I had. I was like, oh great, this is helpful.
Yeah, that can be tough.
Something that when I started hearing about this stuff, my initial thought was, well, if the seller doesn't want to pay the buyer's agent commission and the buyer doesn't want to pay their agent 3%, then all the buyers are just going to say, okay, lower the price of your house 3%, and then we'll buy the house.
Well, there's a challenge with that too. And that's assuming that that listing agent is now going to do the work of that buyer's agent for free. Because somebody still has to do some of that work that's out there. Personally, as a listing agent, I'm not going to just start working with the buyers for free. They're going to have to compensate me still.
Now, when you say you have to do work for the buyer, or that half of the transaction has to take place, can you explain that? Because I know just the contract is like the Matrix to me.
There's a number of challenges with that situation. The first is that the buyer needs some advocacy.
Okay.
Because I am advocating for the seller.
So you want to take care of your seller the most as best you can, because he's your client or she's your client.
I'm legally obligated to.
Oh, fiduciary responsibility, like Kyle was talking about.
Exactly. So I have a legal obligation to advocate for my seller.
Mm-hmm.
An unrepresented buyer comes to me and wants to purchase this house. They're going to be encountering obstacles every step of the way, because every step I am advocating for my seller. I'm advocating for my seller on loan terms.
Mm-hmm.
I'm advocating for my seller on insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I'm advocating for my seller on inspection items, on appraisal. All of these things, my job is to advocate for the seller. So an unrepresented buyer is going to get the short end of the stick all throughout that transaction. Furthermore, I can't represent that buyer. They cannot be I cannot be an agent to them. I can't represent both parties at the same time.
Would that be a conflict of interest?
Well, there's two options.
Yeah, there's a transaction brokerage status, in which case I would have to become neutral to both parties and stop advocating for my seller.
So that means you like step back from being seller, and they kind of just take the role of making all their own decisions and doing their own homework.
Yeah,
kind of.
There's a challenge with that too that comes up. If we did that, now we're still charging the seller our compensation, but now our seller is no longer receiving all of our services.
Oh.
And we are no longer advocating for that seller when that's what they've hired us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have to be a neutral transaction coordinator who is simply facilitating that transaction. In addition to that, we're not being compensated by that buyer.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not receiving errors and omissions insurance from that buyer, and we're liable for anything that happens on that side.
Like if something was written wrong in the paperwork?
Correct. So the way that we're going to be moving forward, there's some gray areas there that are going to have to be addressed, because if the buyer's agent is not there and it's the listing agent that is expected to handle both sides of that transaction, then we're probably going to be charging more for that so that we can keep our insurance and we can cover our expenses. It's not free to do a transaction. So even best case scenario, when we've got a really easy transaction, we have everything lined up, it still costs us money, not just signs, but we pay transaction coordinators, we have admin fees, we've got insurance, there's marketing expenses. There's a number of expenses, even on the easiest transaction. So, and even on those best case scenarios, we can't do it for free.
Well, and in Colorado, we're not allowed to have dual agency. And so
what's dual agency?
Like there's some states that allow for dual agency where you can be an agent for both sides.
At the same, on the same contract?
Like Scott said, like transaction broker is the way that you can switch over, but you're not refereeing. You're basically refereeing the transaction, but you're not advising. You're not coaching. You're not sitting there telling them like your thoughts on things and what you think you should do, and then going to the other side and telling them their thoughts on things.
Oh, because then you're like playing chess on both sides of the board.
There are some states that allow that.
Going on,
and but Colorado's not one of those areas.
Okay. So that right there, just being state to state, is another
right. I mean, every state
thing that has to be resolved.
Different real estate laws, and in Colorado, we can work with the seller as a seller's agent, and then work with the buyer as a customer. And so that's how we can keep our fiduciary responsibility with the seller. Mm-hmm. But on the buyer side, like that's leaving the buyer out there and they're exposed.
They're really taking a big risk.
I mean, the buyers should have somebody representing them. And so, just like Scott said earlier, where he had a VA buyer and they were not paying comp. And, there's a lot of buyers that don't have money sitting aside to where they can afford to just come out of pocket on top of their down payment, on top of everything else to pay that comp. And so those are going to be the buyers that are left out and exposed if a seller's not willing to like split a comp, or seller's broker's not willing to split a comp or something like that with buyer's broker, and especially on the VA stuff. I mean, VA, they can't pay it. It's as simple as that. So
it's illegal.
Yeah, it's against VA's policy.
Right. It's not necessarily illegal.
It's a
it's
policy
just
item.
You can't
VA.
do it.
They don't allow it.
You have to get a different loan.
Yep.
And if VA is the only loan that you want, that you can afford, you're up the creek.
Well, and honestly, there's just not a lot of people that have that money just sitting aside to pay that extra compensation, but they're leaving themselves exposed, to dealing with the listing broker, and the listing broker does not have their fiduciary responsibility in their mind. They have their seller's fiduciary responsibility. That's where they have their fiduciary responsibility at. It's with the seller. And so that just leaves the buyer out there to figure things out for themselves. Yeah.
So even though we're having these compensation changes, it's still considered best practice for the listing agent or the seller to compensate a buyer's broker, especially in a market like ours where we have first-time home buyers and VA buyers. These FHA and VA programs make up a full 25% of the national market.
That's a big chunk of the national market.
Of the national market.
Is it different here because of
it might be a little bit
Carson,
higher here.
Shriver, Peterson?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of military
USAFA.
here. There's a lot of military here. So if you're not offering those terms because you're not willing to pay, the buyer's broker on that, or you're not willing to split comp with buyer's broker on that, it's going to be really hard to bring in buyers because you have a lot of VA here. I mean, there's just
active and retired.
75% of the buyers out there. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say it's probably closer to that number of.
I could see that.
I'm not a statistician either.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. You're married to a loan officer. She does.
There's a lot of VA out here. I mean, when I did primarily residential in the beginning, like there was just, I'd say most of my deals were VA. And they're good clients. Like they're great to work with. I love working with military buyers and stuff like that. They're everywhere, and this is a big market for that. And so I'd say we saw less when I was doing more residential. I'd say we saw less conventionals and more VA and FHA buyers at the time. So
yeah, especially with the first time home buyers too. This is really going to be a problem for them because they're already scraping by.
They're trying to get down payment assistance programs,
closing costs. Yeah, to add another
layer.
Yeah, another layer of expenses on top of that is really going to be a burden.
Well, I talked to another he was a friend of mine. He moved out of town, but he was telling me, like, if you don't have a house, you're just treading water. You're keeping your head up above the water. If you can only afford a rowboat, and the rowboat's got a couple holes in it, but it's at least a rowboat, and you can get into it. Once you're in it, like you're on top of the water, and then you can work and save up, and eventually you can start upgrading boats. But if you're in the water, you're just in the water, treading water.
That's an interesting analogy. Yeah. I think that would fit for a lot of cases.
Right.
As long as it's not a Swiss cheese boat.
Depending on how many holes are in there. But then the appraisals. Seal, right? That's right. Yeah. That's what they got appraisals for, to make sure the house is safe and secure before they give you the money. But I didn't even think about that till just now, as like so many people, especially the first time home buyers, like this is their first opportunity to start building their net worth and creating generational wealth. And this could actually inhibit, the way it plays out could inhibit those buyers from getting started.
Yeah. Can I say one thing on that?
You say many things you want. You're Kyle Tzitzicas.
I think where it needs to start is with agents. And I think agents really need to get themselves educated on this lawsuit. And they need to realize that, like, on our side in commercial real estate, nothing's going to change. We've been practicing this over and over and over again for years. I mean, we've negotiated our comp for years, and we've never had a problem with, like, you know, seller paying comp, or sometimes we have a buyer pay comp. Sometimes we have a tenant pay comp. I mean, it depends on the situation, but there's never been a real problem on that side. Now, I mean, granted, there is a lot of money, a lot more money when you're dealing with companies and stuff like that have multiple locations. They're going to obviously have more money to do those things. But at the end of the day, I think agents are getting really nervous about this, and they're panicking. And I don't think there's a reason to panic. I think there's a reason to get out there and educate your sellers about what they're seeing on the news and what they're seeing on the media, and tell them really what's going on. Be the professional in the situation, and educate your sellers and educate, you know, your buyers on what's going on. And I think that starts with listing agents, where they're going to go in and, you know, say, yeah, I understand what you saw on the news, but you know, if you want to sell your house VA, if you want to sell your house in other areas, you know, think about how many buyers out there don't have that comp to pay on that.
And that's going to impact your market, your eyeballs, absolutely, your market.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, you know, from what I've heard, you can still put that comp on your marketing material, on your websites, on, you know, on that stuff. So it's not advertising the MLS, but you can put that on your advertising stuff. So if you're sending a marketing brochure to, you know, a buyer's broker, or to whatever, like, you know, they can see, like, hey, this broker is going to pay a comp, you know. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's really important to educate your clients and be the professional in the situation, and don't be one of the brokers out there, like, just complaining about this, freaking out, panicking. Be the professional. Educate your clients. That's why they're hiring you. They're paying you to educate them. They're paying you to do your job. They're paying you to, you know, sell their property first and foremost, but they're also paying you to educate them throughout the process, and protect them on things. And by educating them, you are protecting them by telling them that, hey, you know, it would be smart to pay a buyer broker comp, because it's gonna help sell your house, because there's going to be some buyers that can't afford to pay that comp, and those buyers are either going to have to go in unrepresented, or those buyers are going to have to walk away from the transaction altogether, and you didn't sell your house, or you didn't sell your property, or, you know, whatever. So,
well, we did actually see a canary in the coal mine already. So a couple of years ago, Northwest MLS, which is not a realtor-owned MLS, got rid of compensation amounts in their MLS. So we have 2 years of data that we can pull from and look at, see how that affected that market. Did buyers agents go away? Did VA buyers go away? Did FHA buyers go away? The fact is they didn't. They were all still there. They all still did business. And it doesn't even appear that the prices and the market changed very much as a result of that compensation not being shown. That doesn't mean that they stopped offering compensation, but they stopped showing it in the MLS, which is exactly what we'll be facing in July. So with that track record already of data points out there of showing what that does, that has done a couple of things. One, it's shown that we're still supply and demand. That's really what's changing these market forces. It's not the amount that realtors are showing for compensation in the MLS. But the other thing it did is it brought the attention of the Department of Justice to that MLS, because they wanted to see how that impacted the market, if it brought down realtor fees, if it brought down property prices. And though it did change it just a little bit, it didn't change it very much. And the DOJ is not happy with that, because they look at that and they say, well, it's not moving the needle nearly as much as we expected it to.
Okay.
They would prefer that we all work on an hourly rate. I'll let that sink in.
I know how much lawyers cost, or some lawyers cost an hourly. I don't think I want to pay a realtor on an hourly rate.
I wouldn't either. But not only that, but the whole brokerage model would be flipped on its head, because what broker is going to be able to go out there and hire 20 agents on an hourly rate to go service clients?
Yeah. And The thought just, I don't know. Okay, I know you guys aren't tax professionals. You're not legal advice or attorneys. But that sounds like if realtors went on an hourly rate, that's going to increase income taxes that the DOJ would be benefiting from in some roundabout way.
The
Possibly.
DOJ just feels that realtors are overpaid. That's really what it comes down to.
Really?
Yeah. So
wouldn't they be wouldn't it be more cost effective to a buyer or seller though on a commission rather than a hourly rate? Based on what I'm hearing you say, all of the things that go into it?
Well, that's a really good point, because the National Association of Realtors was very specific that with this settlement, we admit no wrongdoing. We haven't been doing anything illegal. We haven't been doing anything wrong. This was a business decision, because if we did not settle, the National Association of Realtors would have to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy.
Oh.
That's how these attorneys work. They go out with these class action suits, and the number that they set is a number just under bankruptcy.
Really?
Absolutely. That's how these numbers are
Smart
arrived at.
little sneakers.
In fact, even the RE/MAX and Anywhere settlements, those dollar amounts were based on the cash reserves on hand.
No way.
So they take as much of your money as they can without putting you out of business or making you file bankruptcy where they will get nothing. It's a very strategic and calculated amount, and it's done by the attorneys. They're the ones making the bulk of the money off of this anyway. It's not these homeowners. That
right, as checks. Is typical with any lawsuit.
Yes. And the irony through this whole thing for me is it's pretty well established fact that a personal injury attorney is going to be collecting 33% on their claim. Okay, go figure.
On vacation.
Right.
Yeah. We're not anywhere close to 33% in our collections or in our compensation. So
whoa.
Yeah.
Holy
the dots
smokes.
Connect, right?
If you're thinking like, even if you did say the variable was 6, if X equals 6, you're cutting that in half and each side's only getting 3. You're still missing out on 30%.
And ours isn't a set amount.
Right.
Well, and here's the other thing to take into consideration. Just like the attorneys get paid at the end of the lawsuit, and I'm not an attorney. My brother is. I'll leave that for him. But, we get paid at closing. So if that property doesn't sell, I mean, besides leases, and we don't get paid until the property is leased out, until, and like I told you, there's other ways we negotiate that, but we don't get paid until closing. So if that property doesn't close, if something falls through, seller decides to take it off the market, we're out whatever marketing dollars we have put into the property, but we don't get paid. So
in a way, you always
have those chances too, or those risks involved in our business. I mean, if we list property and it's going good and we got buyers looking at it, and all of a sudden the seller says, like, you know what, I just changed my mind. I want to take this thing off the market. I mean, yeah, we could technically go after a seller and say, hey, we want you to pay us back in our marketing stuff. Do most of us do that? No. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of times we eat the costs. I mean, and I've never went after a seller and said, hey, I need you to pay for my marketing costs. They decided to take it off the market, not me. And at the end of the day, like we had buyers that were, ready and well. I had perfect example, like 7 years ago, I had a seller that we had 3 offers on the table. And he wouldn't get back. 2 of them started to lose interest. And then seller's like, I want to take it off the market.
No way.
We had 3 offers on the table.
Oh man.
And so, yeah, I had to eat all the expenses I had on that and everything else. And it never got to closing. So that's the flip side of it. The people don't necessarily look at as much.
They don't see that at all.
They don't see
that's
that.
For sure.
And like we're dumping money into that stuff before we even get paid. So we're putting an investment into our property, into our client before we even see any return on it.
Man, if you guys closed every single person that gave you a phone call, you'd feel a lot more money.
Sure. Well, not only that, but you may spend a week with one buyer or a month with one buyer, but you might also spend 2 years with one buyer.
You've seen it, haven't you?
Oh, absolutely. You might show them 10 properties. You might show them 110 properties.
Oh, wow.
So everyone is different. In some cases, you're going to make $5 an hour. In some cases, you might make $50 an hour. But in the end, it's a commission business. So
there's a lot of risk in you guys just doing this method of compensation.
And there has to be enough reward to offset the risk.
Otherwise, you're not going to want to do the job.
That's right.
I had a large group, and I mean a really large group. And they're in different states. They're nationwide. They had very specific needs on what they needed on a building and on a property. It took me a year and a half to find the right property.
Was that here in Colorado Springs?
Yeah, right here in Colorado Springs. And it was an industrial use. And so, but they had very specific needs for what they needed. And that didn't exist. And we finally,
you had to find like a property,
got them the right property
that they could tailor to that need.
Yep. And I finally found them the right property, but it took a year and a half.
Wow.
Of working with them. And they were not just like, walking up, working with just me. They were calling other brokers and stuff like that too.
Oh, they were shopping around.
Oh yeah. They were doing stuff.
They were just trying to get done what they could get done.
They just wanted a property no matter what. So, I mean, they had been talking to every broker in town for a year and a half, and I finally found them a property. But there's that time where, it could take a while to do a deal and to find that right property or to get in that, and especially on our side on commercial, it's so specialized in so many different, needs and wants and stuff like that. You might have the right size building 10 times over around the city, but if it doesn't have, like, let's say the client needs fire suppression and only 50% of them have fire suppression. And then
because there's some old buildings here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but some of the old buildings have fire suppression in them too.
Because they've been retrofitted.
Old, they could be retrofitted. Okay. And so, you might have, that same tenant might need, or buyer might need three-phase power in a building. And so now all of a sudden half those buildings that have fire suppression now have three-phase. And now they need a 2-acre yard, must have 2-acre yard. Now half of those buildings now have a 2-acre yard. And then you've got, then they might need 20-foot ceilings because they have certain size trucks that they're pulling in. So it just starts narrowing it down even more. And now we're like, you know what, we got one, but that location doesn't work. So now we have to start searching for something for you guys. Now we're talking about looking at land. Now we're talking about
land, meaning like you could build.
And then on top of that, the zoning has to work for it too.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's another thing. Like we have to look at all those pieces. And so, yeah, I mean, you could spend a lot of time with one client.
I'm glad I didn't get my real estate license.
Well, what's really interesting about that is that we have the same license.
Okay.
But our levels and experience and competency are completely different areas. So, like, I would never try to work with a commercial client in that space. I would not be able to serve them well. But back to your question about, does the seller ever try to do it themselves? Yeah, sometimes they do. And if it works okay, that's great. They got lucky. But anytime there's an obstacle, a roadblock, when the zoning doesn't fit or when the space isn't right, that's really when we are earning our compensation.
Have you ever seen deals fall apart because they were self-represented buyers or sellers?
Usually we're not part of it.
Yeah, I haven't because I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not involved in it. If I'm in it, it's going to hold up.
Right. You're going to make it happen.
Yeah, at least we're going to try.
Right. Okay. Well, it has been an hour and 20 minutes.
Wow. Flew by.
It does, doesn't it? Go ahead.
I will say I've seen deals fall apart because of agents.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, okay. You did mention earlier, so I liked there's a couple things. It sounds to me like all of this media frenzy hubbub that consumers or individuals might be hearing are not hearing that things are negotiable. So regardless of what falls where, things have been negotiable, they are negotiable, and they will always be negotiable.
Yes.
And then B, shoot, I lost my train of thought. What was the other thing? It was like, was it the constant? No, it wasn't the constant. Darn it, this always happens. There's like trying to simplify what the issue is. Gosh, it was negotiable.
Well, honestly, I think the issue, we've been wrapped up in compensation, but really compensation isn't the issue. The issue is making sure that the buyers are accurately represented.
I think that might be what it was.
We want to make sure that they understand their agreement with their agents, that their agents are accurately presenting to them the relationship that we have with them, what is expected of us and what is expected of them, and how the compensation works. And in all honesty, there have not been enough realtors doing a good job about that. And if they were, we would not have found ourselves in this mess to begin with. So it's really not, we don't want to get bogged down on where is the compensation listed. It doesn't matter, because we have an agreement with the buyer. The buyer is going to pay us for our services. We're going to try to get that from outside sources if we can, but if we can't, then it still falls to the buyer. They need to understand that. And as long as we're all on the same page, it should be pretty straightforward navigating these changes in the months to come.
So finding a good agent on either side of the fence that is knowledgeable and can keep you informed or educate you on the questions you have is key. Absolutely key.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. We got two great agents here at Max Real Estate Group. Throwing that plug in there again.
Thank you.
Scott, I heard you have some scenarios you go through with. You have a team here.
I do.
In a nice, beautiful office overlooking the mountains here in Colorado Springs.
Thanks.
You guys go over some scenarios that you've read about in either articles or circumstances that have happened. What are some of the juicy ones that you guys have talked through and your team has come up with solutions for?
Well, back to the buyer agency. So it's been our practice before the settlement. We always do a buyer agency agreement with our buyers. And we explain to them how we're compensated and that we're going to attempt to get our compensation from the seller. But if we can't, it still falls to that buyer to make up the difference or to cover our compensation. I don't get any pushback on that, honestly, because I feel like as long as they're informed and they know up front, the buyers are comfortable with that. We're educating them along the way and making sure that they're comfortable with their decisions. And in the cases where the compensation is not covered, they know that in advance. So we don't just show up at a property, they like it, and then they're like, okay, well, how do we work out compensation? We're already going to figure that out. We're going to reach out to the other agent via phone call, or if we can't do that, it just goes in the offer. We'll write it into the offer to make sure it's addressed. Everybody is on the same page.
So it's really,
I agree with Scott on that too. There's no reason to have like that gray area. There's no reason to have surprises. Like I can tell you, buyers and sellers hate surprises, and there's no reason to surprise your buyers and your sellers. And that's, Scott does business like I do on that. It's like, there's no reason to surprise him. And I never get pushback either because, I'm telling them how it is. I'm good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah. So if you're an agent, give your buyers and your clients the information they need to know to be comfortable with the hundreds of thousands of dollars they're spending on their asset. And then if you're a consumer or individual, look for someone who's knowledgeable and that you can trust. So that way, they have your best interest when they're representing you in your real estate transaction.
Well said.
That was pretty simple. That was so much easier than all of this muddy water that's been splashing around.
It really is a little bit more straightforward than I think the media has been presenting it, but the slant that they put on it has just been inaccurate.
Well, I hope this helps. If you're watching, Scott Sufak, Kyle Tzitzicas, great residential and commercial real estate agents to consult if you have something coming up here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Kyle, any last words you want to share about you and your business before we close this thing off?
No, I mean, if you ever need any commercial needs, you know where to go. I've done a little bit of everything, and I do a lot more industrial shopping center kind of stuff. So that's kind of my niche, but I've done stuff outside of that as well. And, love to help your client out if they need it. So.
Awesome. Scott, anything about you and your team, your business you'd like to share?
Well, we're never too busy for your referrals. So
I love it.
Love to get a call from folks, and we're always happy to help buyers and sellers. And the way we do it is through education. So we just want to make sure that everybody is educated and they're making informed decisions.
Now, do you give guitar lessons on how to jam out with your buddies?
No, I'm a terrible guitar player.
Are you really? I heard you jam out sometimes.
I play bass poorly.
Okay. Who do you play with?
Oh, mostly by myself.
Okay. No garage concerts coming up.
Don't have any garage band concerts.
Oh darn. We can't have you at the next Christmas party.
Oh, you you would hate it. You would cut that party off early.
Kyle, I heard that you are a professional fly fisherman.
I mean, not anymore. I just do it to have fun nowadays. Every once in a while, I'll
Can you teach it?
Some fly shops. Yeah, I used to guide.
I want to learn how to fly fish.
We'll have to go. Let's go. It's that's my relaxation.
Okay. Well, see, that's
no
why I
kids in my
think it would be
ear
fun.
anymore. That's no phone calls. This
Get away from all the mess.
My favorite part about fly fishing is when I was so tourists.
I was. Oh man. Well, both of you guys, thank you for being on the show. This has been great. I really hope this is helpful. Again, check out Remax Real Estate Group if for any of your home buying, home selling, or commercial real estate needs. We got Kyle Tzitzicas, Scott Sufak. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, Juice.